So the goal of the series that we're in is to take a look at how Easter changes everyday life. And last week, as we got this series kicked off, Pastor Ben took us on an important topic, down an important journey, as we saw a difficult teaching that all of us wonder about from time to time. In times of pain and despair, we might wonder if God is there or if there is a plan. And last week we saw without a doubt that in your pain, in your despair, Jesus walks with you. And I think that's a challenging thing for all of us to remember, that in the painful, difficult, uncertain, hopeless, heartbreak moments of life, that Jesus is very much there with you. And so I'm so glad we got to start the series that way, having that focus be on those difficult moments of life. Today, we're going to look at the rest. And I was kind of curious, like in a general person's life, how much of a person's life is categorized by extraordinary moments, like pain and sickness and hopelessness and heartbreak? Like what percentage of your life do you think is defined by that? And then what percentage of life is ordinary? Just the routine, the mundane. And this shouldn't come as a shock, but there is no definitive statistic on this, like how much of your life is the extraordinary versus the ordinary. But as I looked at different numbers and what different people said, they said you can safely say that the average life is about 5 to 10% extraordinary moments, deep moments of pain and hopelessness and heartbreak and despair. And last week, we saw how God is present in those moments. And he gives direction and purpose that we need in those critical hours. Now, I'm not really that good at math, but if 5 to 10% of your life is the extraordinary moments, I think that leaves 90 to 95% ordinary. The everyday, the commuting through traffic that you've done hundreds of times and your car basically has the route memorized on its own, which if you have a Tesla, maybe it does know the route on its own. There's the everyday mundane. It's the wake up, feed the kids, get the kids to school, go to work, come back, make dinner, feed the kids again, and get them washed and get them to bed and go to bed, and next day it's repeat. I mean, it's just repeat. It's the ordinary parts of life. It's the daily conversations about the weather or the Vikings or, the basketball. Like, it's the mundane, it's the routine. It's the I've seen this before. And it's interesting, I think, that the things we remember most are the extraordinary moments. The tough times, but also the celebratory times, the weddings, the births, the special events. But here's the tension. If we only run to God in the extraordinary times, we're missing something. And it's so easy to drift in the ordinary, to get lost in it, to forget that there's still work God needs to do in the ordinary. I think we would all acknowledge there's danger in saying, God, I want you to be here for this page of my life, this extraordinary moment, while you kind of overlook the chapters of ordinary that he wants to work in as well. So what we're going to talk about today is this, that it's so good to run to God in despair and pain, but we want to see what it means that God walks with you also in the ordinary. What does it mean that God walks with you in the ordinary? And how do you recognize God walking with you in the ordinary? And what does he want to do with you or for you or through you in the ordinary? Well, today as we ask that question, we're going to see a good answer that comes up a couple weeks maybe after Jesus rose from the dead. What we're going to look at today is an encounter that Jesus had with 7 of his disciples as they were doing something very ordinary. It was boringly ordinary. And they weren't expecting Jesus to be there in the ordinary, but he was. And what he did in their ordinary changed the way they saw life. And maybe, as we look at John's account of what he saw in the ordinary, it'll change the way you view your routines and mundane parts of your life too. So for Easter Sunday, we looked at John chapter 20, where we saw the account of John and Peter going to the tomb, and John let us know who beat who. John won. John was the one who got there first. John was the disciple Jesus loved. He made sure that we remembered that. And so today, we're going to go to the very next chapter in John chapter 21, where now it's a couple weeks after Jesus died and rose again, and the disciples are kind of going back into ordinary life. Here's how it happened. John 21, afterward, so John's saying this is a new chapter, like a new event. Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. And when he says that Jesus appeared, that word for appeared is a very intentional word. It's not like you're walking through the grocery store and then you happen to see your neighbor or your friend from church there and they're like, oh, hey, how's it going? Like that's not the kind of appeared we're talking about. We're talking about a strategic moment in time where Jesus picked this time and this place to show himself to his disciples and to make himself present with them. Now, you probably think of those moments as like this big worship service where people are singing and the song is amazing. Maybe you're thinking of viewing the Rocky Mountains or some other natural beauty and you're like, wow, God is here. But Jesus picks a different time, an ordinary time. And John says, it happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, that includes John, and 2 other disciples were there. So there's 11 disciples, but this specific time, there's only 7 of them. And for a minute, I thought, is that how 7-Eleven got its name? But it's not. They were open from 7 to 11. That's how they got their name. But this is the 7 of the 11, and they're together. And you're like leaning in and it's like, okay, John, what's next? Like we just heard the resurrection story. We just heard Jesus appearing to people and like amazing them. It's like, what is this story that you have to end your gospel with, your account of Jesus' life? And here's how John continues. I'm going out to fish, said Simon Peter. That's it. This is a fishing story. We just heard about Jesus dying on a cross and rising from the dead, and now John wants to tell us a fishing story. Now, to be fair, we think of fishing as a recreational thing. You go fishing for fun. But not so with Simon Peter and some of the other disciples. For them, fishing was their business. It was their career. It was how they paid the bills. It was how they ate. So now that it's been a couple weeks after Jesus died and rose again, they've seen him a couple times, but they're still like, what do we do? Where are we going? And Simon says, well, I'll go back to what I know. I'll go back to what's ordinary. And that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. He had to do something. They had to pay the bills. They had to eat. But at the same time, they were thinking, I guess we'll go back into being fishers of fish. And then the story continues. Now, the important thing is dialogue is so important in any story you tell. It's around the dialogue that people get engaged and they like cling to the details. And so when John starts with this, he says, I'm going out to fish, said Simon Peter. He continues the dialogue to draw the reader in even more. They said, we'll go with you. This is boring. I'm sorry. And I think John might be emphasizing that. This was so ordinary. I'm going to go fishing. We'll go too. Now, with any story, there has to be like some interest in it, like, okay, they must have caught something really good. But John goes on, so they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Like, this is the worst story ever, John. I mean, at least there's got to be a point somewhere, and he's about to get there. But maybe I'll just apply this to you really quickly. Have you ever wondered if your life has a point? I think especially of people who are newer to faith or people who are experiencing new growth or new transformation, like the gospel is hitting them in a new way that it's never hit them before. And they're so excited and built up and all these things, but then it's like Monday comes and they get up and they feed the kids and they take them to the school bus and they get ready for work and they go to work and they come home and they try to figure out dinner and it's normal. It's ordinary. And they might think, where is God's place in this? Now, what the disciples didn't yet see might be what you don't yet see. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples didn't realize it was him. It might be because it was about 100 yards, about a football field away, that Jesus was on the shore and they were out in the sea. Maybe he was a little bit too far. But I think it was more than that. They weren't expecting to see him, and so they weren't looking for him. The reason I think that is because if you just go back one chapter, we see that same word, realize. That word realize comes from a Greek word which literally just means to see or to recognize. And so you can see something, but not see it. You can notice something, but not realize what it is. They saw Jesus on the shore, but they didn't realize it was him, just like what happened in the previous chapter with a woman named Mary Magdalene. Mary showed up at the tomb of Jesus expecting to give him a proper burial, but she found it empty. And she turned around, and this is what happened with her. At this, she turned and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not see him. She did not realize that it was him. Well, you often won't see what you're not looking for. The disciples weren't realizing it was Jesus. Mary didn't realize it was Jesus. Is it possible the same has happened to you? You've gotten into this mind frame where the ordinary parts of life, the day-to-day, the mundane, the routine, the autopilot is just you, but not recognizing someone is on the shore. Not recognizing that this is a way in the ordinary that God actually builds people in the best way. So number 2, Jesus is present even when you don't realize it. Now, in the next few weeks, we're going to talk more about that aspect of it because for the disciples and for Mary Magdalene, it was a physical presence. On the next few weeks, we're going to talk about how Jesus sends his Spirit in a different way to us and how we are always in his presence through that Spirit. But the same principle remains for us today. We tend to miss God in the ordinary because what interest would he have in that? We run to God in the extraordinary times, but maybe we don't realize he's there in the ordinary as well. And so what does Jesus do with the 7 of 11 who don't see him? What would an excited rabbi do, a Lord, their Savior do, when they're out on the boat, just lost and drifting in their ordinary? What does he do with me, with you, when we're just drifting through life, waiting for the extraordinary, not realizing who's present with you now? This is what Jesus did for them. He called out to them from the shore. Now, he could have called out so many things. He could have demanded their respect and their praise and their worship as the resurrected Messiah, but instead he approaches them on a different level altogether. They were having a very ordinary day, and he came to them in a very ordinary way. He called out to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" And this is so hard to take from the Greek and get the full expression of it and bring it into English. That word for friends is very relaxed. It's kind of like how we would say, "Hey, buddy," or "Hey, lad." I don't think we say lad anymore, but that's another way to say it. "Hey, lad," "Hey, friend." It's this very relaxed, very informal way to speak to someone, not like a rabbi would speak to his disciple. "Hey, friends." And then that word for fish this is the only place this Greek word is used in the New Testament. It really, literally just says something you eat alongside bread. He's not even saying like, "Did you catch any good bass or good trout lately?" But basically what he's saying is, "Hey, find anything worth eating?" It's this very relaxed, very informal way of just reaching out to them. "Friends, have you caught anything?" And I wonder, what would Jesus say to me in my ordinary? Just going through the routines. "Hey, you find anything fulfilling lately? Hey, you find anything worth living for lately? Hey, catch anything?" And I love the response of the disciples. "Nope." Nope, they answered. No, they answered that we haven't caught anything. Nothing worth eating today. Now, here's where things get a little bit weird. Here's where Jesus, again, he could have said something like this. He could have said, well, maybe it's because you were taught to fish for something else. He could have said something like this. Maybe you're failing because I told you to be fishers of people. But instead of using sarcasm, instead of demeaning them, instead Jesus, he says something so unusual. And I think what he actually said, I think he had a little smile, a little grin as he said it. He said, throw your net on the right side of the boat, and you'll find something. And I think this was with a little grin in his face because this was a distant echo of what had happened 3 years earlier when he was just meeting these disciples for the first time. The Bible records how Jesus got into Simon Peter's boat that very first day. Simon Peter had a long night of fishing, didn't catch anything. Coming back in, he's cleaning his nets. He's basically shutting down for the day. And Jesus says, no, let's go back out there. I need to use your boat as a preaching platform. So Simon Peter takes his boat back out. Jesus is standing there. Jesus is preaching to the people who are on the shore. And once he's done, Peter's like, let's get back already. It's been a long night. But Jesus says, no, take those nets you just cleaned. Let's go out again. Put it into the deep water and let's see if we catch something. Peter's like, we've been out all night, but because you say so, we will. And that very first day, they put out the nets, and wouldn't you know it, huge catch of fish. Miraculous. And at that, Peter said, we knew something was different about him. And now, 3 years later, after his death, after his resurrection, Jesus calls from the shore, hey, friends, find anything worth eating? Nope. Try the right side. Now, I'm no fisherman, but I don't think there's a big difference between the left side of the boat and the right side of the boat. And maybe the disciples, as they heard this, that maybe they were chuckling like, oh yeah, buddy, thanks. We hadn't thought of that one. And so maybe as a joke, they're like, okay, ready, watch, we're going to try the right side of the boat. And so they did it, and something happened. They actually did it. When they threw the nets onto the right side of the boat, something amazing happened. They were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. And something clicked in John's mind in that moment. He said, this is eerily familiar. That voice, the way it echoes on the water, the command, the simplicity, the result. The disciple whom Jesus loved, again, John has to remind us he was the one whom Jesus loved. The disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it's the Lord. That's Jesus. It's got to be him. And in a Simon Peter kind of way, he's kind of brash. He's kind of just, don't think, just act first. This is what Simon Peter did. As soon as he heard him say, it's the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and he jumped into the water. Just jumped in. He's going to go to Jesus as quickly as he possibly can. Now, an interesting thing is that word for jumped into, it's the same word they use for the nets. The basic meaning of that word is to cast. So they cast the nets at Jesus' command, and now Peter is casting himself into the water. Now, this is really important for us, because it's not just what Peter was jumping into, but remember what he was jumping away from. A very large catch. So, the net was cast in obedience, but Peter was cast in love. The net was cast because some guy on the shore said, try the right side, and they did. But Peter cast himself in love. He said, I need to make it to shore as quickly as possible. And this brings up such an important thing for me and for you. Sometimes in the ordinary times of life, God will disrupt ordinary with pain and discomfort and despair. And sometimes he can use that to draw you to him. But what we see in this episode is that God doesn't just use pain and distress to draw people out of ordinary and closer to him. Sometimes he also uses success. Peter and the others were given such success on that day, and I'm sure the money signs were starting to add up as they saw this large net full of fish, maybe months worth of salary. But Peter didn't cast himself into his success. He cast himself into the water so he could chase down the one who had given him success in the first place. I think the danger for us is that when God sees fit to give success, it's too easy for me, too easy for us to cast ourselves into success rather than seeking the one who gave it to us. And for some of you, maybe success has become an ordinary thing. You just assume life is going to be going good. You're just going to assume you're more than ordinary, and you've gotten so accustomed to it, you can't even see it. So my question for you is, have you been viewing success as ordinary? Something you just don't even recognize anymore. It's just part of life, and you don't even use it as an opportunity to do what Peter did, to cast yourself in the water, fervently seeking the one who gave it. So what we learn from this is, don't let success become ordinary. Let it cast you to Jesus. Let it direct you to the one who allows for success. And by the way, every success that God grants you is an opportunity to be drawn closer to him. We use Peter in this moment as an example for what it looks like to not be overwhelmed by success to the point where it distracts us. But it's an opportunity to cast yourself to God. Now, we can think of Peter in flattering terms, like, wow, I wish I could do that. I wish I could just jump to Jesus the moment anything good happens. But maybe it wasn't so nice, so pleasant for the rest of the seven who had to haul this boat back to shore now. Maybe John has a little bit of sarcasm when he says the other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore. Could have helped us, but instead he jumped in. It wasn't that far, not far from shore, about 100 yards. So the others are rowing. They're bringing this boat back to the shore. Peter is, beating them because he's just swimming through the water. And here's where the moment happens. Here's where they finally get to shore, and they see something that maybe they weren't expecting. Sometimes we might think that God needs our success to do what he wants to do. But that wasn't the case here. Because when they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and bread too. This whole time, Jesus said, hey, have you caught anything? Nope, try the right side, and then all this stuff. They didn't need to do that. They could have just come to shore and had a pleasant breakfast without all that work. That's a good thing for us to remember. God doesn't need your success. Doesn't need me to do things for him. Something I often think about as a pastor, God doesn't need me to explain his word. It's powerful the way it is. He doesn't need us. But sometimes the despair or the success of life are opportunities to draw you closer to him. And so they get on shore. There's Jesus with this fish, this bread is already cooking. And then Jesus says, it's okay. Go ahead and tend to your boat. Jesus said to them, go ahead and bring some of the fish you have just caught. We'll have more. So Simon Peter climbed back into the boat and dragged the net ashore. And John records the statistics for you. It was full of large fish, 153. But even with so many, the net was not torn. In other words, what he's saying is this was a miracle. But before they could get too distracted by success, Jesus doesn't turn to it and says, awesome, we're going to start a new fishing business, Right Side Fishing Co. We're going to build cathedrals. We're going to build all basilicas. It's going to be amazing. We're going to open up enterprises and all the major, this wasn't a means to some end. Jesus said, go ahead, count the fish, go ahead, tend to them. But then he said, this is where we're going, guys. Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. It's all we need. Worry about the fish later. Just come and have breakfast. And I think sometimes we miss the ordinary moments where we can just pause and reflect on what God is doing in those moments. The daily commutes, the busy calendars, the retirement years, it's the days that are just routine and mundane. Just hear that invitation. Come, have breakfast. And as they did, none of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" Because they knew. They knew it was the Lord. And then Jesus came, took the bread, and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. They had a lovely, ordinary breakfast. And then as John wraps up this section, he just lets us know kind of where things fit. He's saying, this is the reason I shared this with you. It's just an ordinary day, a very random encounter, but the reason I share this with you is because this is just one of 3 times. This is the 3rd time that Jesus had now appeared intentionally to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. And I just wanted to let you know the story of how he showed up in an ordinary day. Now, as we wrap up this text, John said this is the 3rd time. Like, this is becoming a regular occurrence. And the other gospel writers record other times Jesus appeared to people, at one time appearing to hundreds of people all at once. People began to realize, okay, this is real, this is new, this is ordinary, that God is with us. And there's this one other caution that I want to add to what I mentioned earlier. Sometimes we might think of success as something ordinary. Like we take things for granted. And when it comes to the way that God is so faithful, he's always there, he's always blessing, the unfortunate reality is it can become so ordinary for us that we get used to it. We get used to it that God gives us day after day. We get used to it that we wake up in the morning. We get used to it that we have family and friends. We get used to it that there's money that we have enough for today. We get used to it that we have a career and success. To us, it's ordinary. But we miss how God is present in every little thing to give us what we need. That reminds me of when I was a little kid. I can't remember how old, but it was old enough to remember. And I was so young that my mom still made my bed for me. She had this amazing way of making my bed when I was a kid. Like she had this, I don't know what it was. If she went to like mom school to figure out how to like make beds perfectly, but it was always just whenever she washed my sheets, I'm like, yes. I'd go to my bed, it's just perfectly made. But there was one day where she didn't make it quite right. I can't remember if the sheets were a little too short on the bed or maybe they were too tight on the side. I couldn't remember. But I was just getting into bed. I'm like, Mom, you made it wrong. She loved me too much to snap back. But I remember what she said. With this perfect balance of love and discipline, she said, Matthew, then you can make it next time. I said, I'm sorry. Please keep making it. I love you, Mom. I love you, Mom. Do you ever do that with God? Faithfully, day after day, God blesses you, gives you the things that are perfect. Every gift is a perfect gift from your Father in heaven. Some days you just expect it to be ordinary. Some days you complain because it's not quite right. Say, God, why'd you allow this? God, why is this happening? And God, where's my success? I'm supposed to have it. And pretty soon what we get lost in is the ordinary. And for us, ordinary isn't just drifting. For us, ordinary can be dismissing the God who's been there all along. And so in the first century, there was an ordinary practice they had for criminals and thieves. The Roman government had perfected this art of crucifixion. It was so ordinary that they had their rules, they had their procedures, and it was step by step a perfect way to crucify someone so that they could maximize the pain and torture and humiliation before they would actually die. And there was one day where it was an ordinary day, and a centurion was ordered 3 criminals to crucify. 3 people who had been declared guilty of the death penalty. And so as an ordinary day, they lined them up, they put them where they belonged, they cast lots for their clothing, they divided everything amongst themselves. It was ordinary, it was procedure. but one of them was different. One of them didn't call down curses on everyone around them, but rather said, Father, forgive them. One of them wasn't bitter and full of hatred, but rather they saw reflections of love as he said, John, take care of my mother. This one in the middle perplexed them. And at the very end of the day, as this one finally died, he did so not out of injustice, but he said, Father, to you I commit my spirit. He willingly gave his life. And there was nothing ordinary about it. To the point where that centurion who was in charge of things, he said, truly, he was extraordinary. This was the Son of God, and we just killed him. And what made it different is that what held him to the cross was not the verdict of Pontius Pilate, nor the hatred of the Jewish leaders. What held him there was grace. The grace to take our ordinary sins that are so common and face the punishment for them on our behalf. And it's by grace he stayed on that cross. And by God's power and grace, 3 days later, he rose from the dead to guarantee that you're good with God. And as these disciples encountered him day after day after day, they began to realize this new extraordinary truth that God isn't just after people who have a lot to offer, and he's not just present in the big moments that stand out to us, but he walks with you in the ordinary. And Easter means that grace is present in every ordinary moment. Yes, let's run to God in moments of distress and pain. And yes, let's not forget that he walks with us in the ordinary as well. Let's pray. Dear Father in heaven, the way life works, it can be so easy to get into autopilot mode. We see the routines, the mundane. It's the exciting things that we might pray to you about or ask your help with. But it's so hard to maybe realize your presence in the rest of it. So today, as we heard the account of the 7 disciples who were out fishing on an ordinary day, I pray that what John wrote through your Spirit would guide us on how to see our ordinary days as well. Nothing is ordinary when grace is applied to it. I thank you that as we look back at days past, chapters lost, moments where we could have realized you were there but didn't, I thank you that our sin has been taken away through your extraordinary grace. Help us to see how you are present with us every day and how you're using these chapters of our lives to shape us to be closer to you. We pray all this in Jesus, our Savior's name. Amen.